Hi you guys, I'm back with another video. If you don't know me, let me introduce myself. My name is Michaela. This is my second pregnancy, my second plant-based pregnancy. I've been vegan, plant-based for 8 years now. And although I did not share my journey of my first pregnancy, I wanted to come on here and talk about just the different phases and experiences and symptoms that I've had with this pregnancy, and also kind of touch back on some of the differences from last pregnancy to this pregnancy. So today we're going to be talking about weeks 0 to 4. And if you don't already know, week 0 to 2 based off of a 40-week pregnancy. Week 1 and day 1 would be the day that you start your period. And then roughly most women ovulate around the second week or so, give or take some. So the second week would kind of be estimated around the ovulation time. And then the 2 weeks is like that 2-week wait period that a lot of women have when they're trying to get pregnant. So we're just going to talk about from week 1 to week 4 in this video. The next video will be from weeks 5 to 8. Yeah, I didn't count that. Although I am further along in my pregnancy now, I did keep track of like all of my symptoms and whatnot through each week that I was pregnant. So what I'll start off by saying is there was no real like 2-week wait for me, because this pregnancy was a surprise to me, as my last pregnancy was. So although this pregnancy wasn't planned, I was like super shocked when I found out, but we'll go into that in a minute. But I have some notes here, so if you see me kind of like looking off to the side, that's what I'm looking at, is my notes. I will say I don't know the exact date that I ovulated. This is where it gets really tricky. I don't know when I actually ovulated, because I was still breastfeeding and I still am now. And because of that, for some reason, this specific week, even with like the test strips of your LH, which tells you like when you're ovulating, I didn't have a ovulation peak. So I figured, maybe I might not be ovulating this week, or maybe it's going to come later. I had been ovulating the past few months and I was showing an LH peak. This month, didn't see one. Didn't think too much of it, because like I said, I'm still ovulating and sometimes your hormones can do different things. So I don't know the exact date that I ovulated, but I do know the day the deeds were done, because I keep track of all of that, along with I do charting. So that's typically how I know kind of like what's going on with my body. This month was just like, it just kind of threw me for a loop. Some of the first things I kind of noticed that made me like, but it didn't really make me think that I was like pregnant. They were just signs that I can look back at now and be like, that was a little weird. So the first thing was, we have stairs that go upstairs and downstairs, and I go up them and down them all the time, chasing after Kyrie or taking clothes upstairs or going upstairs for any little thing. And I had noticed when I had walked down the stairs around the 3-week mark, I felt a little winded. And I was just like, that's so weird. Mind you, I was like really working out at this time on the Peloton. So like that would be really weird for me to be somewhat winded like that. But I just thought, that's really weird. I normally am not like breathing this hard when I'm like walking, like quickly walking down the stairs. One other thing that I noticed is, like I said, I really had got into riding the Peloton again at this time, and I was like really committing myself to it. And I really wanted to tone up again. I really wanted to start running and stuff. So like, I want to say 2 weeks prior to this, I started really riding the bike. Or maybe like, no, I was probably riding the bike a little bit more than that. Like, because I had just got the bike like a month before. I want to say like a month before, something like that. And so when I was riding around the 3rd week mark, I remember like getting so sweaty and like overheated. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe my body's really like doing something. And I will say another little sign that had happened was I had got like, my skin had got really, really dry. So because my skin had got really, really dry, I started eating like extra clean, because I'm like, okay, my liver is obviously going through something. Maybe, I need to kind of like cleanse a little bit more. And granted, you guys, I eat very, very clean. If you follow me on social media, you know how like clean I am. I usually have my celery juice or watermelon juice and all these other things that I do to like kind of cleanse the body from the inevitable toxins we're exposed to on a daily basis. Not anything that I'm actually like putting in my body, but the air, the scents and fragrances we're exposed to, the things that we're exposed to when we walk into a store, just like whatever the case may be. Anyways, I don't want to go off on a tangent on that specifically right now. But I had just noticed I was like sweating a lot. And I'm like, okay, maybe because I'm eating. On one of the days, I think I even ate raw. Like I was just like, okay, let me, because I know what to do usually. Like if my skin is getting like really dry, and it was like on my face, it was like under my eye, it was like really dry and almost like, it even had got itchy, like itchy under my eye, and my actual eyeballs were like really itchy too. And I'm like, what is going on? I didn't know. So usually anytime my body gives me a sign of something, my automatic go-to is just like do some more cleansing, because that always works. Your body is always talking to you, right? So I started eating, I think I ate raw for a few days and I felt great, like physically and whatnot, but I was just like, my skin is still kind of acting up a little bit. Like no matter what the things I changed, I did like one day with like no fats, and then I did one day all raws, and I'm like, I'm still like overheating, sweating, and still like, kind of having this dryness. Mind you, I wasn't sweating and I wasn't working out. Like that wasn't a thing. But so that was kind of weird. I just, what sweating is good for the body. So I just looked at it like, okay, my body's detoxing. And so here's another thing that like kind of tripped me up a little bit. Because in my first pregnancy, one of the first things I had noticed was my boobs were really tender and sore, but like way earlier than my period. Like normally they would get sore around a few days before my period was gonna come. This was like a common thing for me. But on my first pregnancy, my boobs were sore a whole like week and a few days before my period came. So that's kind of what like signaled me to be like, something's a little wrong. That was my first pregnancy. The second pregnancy, my milk supply actually dropped a little bit, but I thought, oh, maybe it's because I'm eating raw. Maybe I didn't because I don't count my calories or anything, but like I was like, maybe I kind of am a little low on calories or something, and Kyrie is like requiring more milk or something like that. Mind you, Kyrie is 2, so he's still breastfeeding, but he only breastfeeds like at nighttime. And I just noticed like there was nothing really in there. And he still doesn't mind. He will, what they call comfort nurse. So kind of using your boob as like a pacifier to go to sleep. So another thing that I had noticed was my milk supply had dropped, but I had just in that initial like 3rd week, I didn't think too much of it. Like I said, I was kind of thinking, oh, it's probably this or probably that. It didn't come to mind that like, oh, I'm probably pregnant. This is what made it also different, because like when I thought, oh, my milk supply dropped, I thought more of like, oh, you're not getting enough calories, which has never happened. I've always had an overabundance of milk, even up until this pregnancy, and then all of a sudden it kind of just dropped. And I was like, okay, well, maybe because my period's going to be here like in another week or so. And it's just kind of, I just threw it up in the air like, oh, it's no big deal. Like, I'll just eat a little bit more calories and it should be fine. One day, I think I was like just sitting down and I noticed like a sharp pain in one of my breasts. Mind you, they did not swell. They didn't, my milk supply had like, it almost seemed like it drained out of my breasts. So they were not, they were not full at all. They really felt like they were like completely empty. And I was like, this is so weird. Like I've never experienced it. But then, like I said, I started thinking about all these other things. Like maybe my body's just like done with breastfeeding or something, even though I didn't think that was a thing. But like I said, it wasn't that big of a deal to me because my son was getting all the nutrition from all the foods he was eating. The breast milk was just more of like a comfort thing for him at this point. I didn't really know whether I was going to wean him or if he was going to wean himself yet. So it was kind of like up in the air. So it's kind of like, we'll see what goes. We'll see kind of like which comes first or what happens. At one point, like I had got this like just sharp pain in only one of my breasts. And I kind of started feeling it like, do I feel sore? It didn't feel sore. Kind of reminded me of like these little sharp pains I would get towards the end of pregnancy in my first pregnancy. It would be like these little sharp it almost felt like little firecrackers of just like boom. And it just like, it would be quick, but it would be like almost little sharp cramps in your titty, like behind your titty though. But this was like behind in like my muscle or like in that area. Cause like I said, my breasts really felt pretty empty. And that's what was like my first kind of like, that's different. Cause I don't get that before my period. Like that's not a thing for my period. This was all kind of like around week 3-ish. Around like close to week 4, like a few days before my missed period was about to arrive, I started to get some lower back pain and some cramping, kind of like in the morning time. And it felt like period stuff. So I'm like, oh, maybe my period's going to come actually like a few days early, which sometimes happens once in a while. My periods are usually 27 to 30 days, like 27 to 30, 31 days around there. It kind of jumps around. But there was 1 month since I've had a Kyrie that it was 25 days. So I just thought, oh, like maybe my period's just gonna come a little early. I even told my boyfriend, like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. My back hurts. Like, he was like, are you okay? A little bit. He was just like, kind of looked at me, and I was just like, I think my period's just kind of coming. And he was just like, oh, okay. Um, and I was like so sure at that moment, because it really did kind of feel like period cramping a little bit. And I was really, really tired. And so I thought, yeah, it's definitely coming. I remember it being specifically that morning where I was just like, I had to like lay in bed because I felt like really tired. Like, and Kyrie was up and I really wanted to just go back to sleep. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really feel like I could like lay here and just, I don't know. I just felt like my period is going to come. So fast forward to like 2 more days and I don't feel the cramps really, like they haven't really come back. And I'm like, this is interesting. And now I'm about 2 days before my period, the earliest it normally would start. So I'm like, well, I guess I could take a test. I was like, because I started getting a little nervous at this point, because I'm like, well, I guess I can take a test and see, because a lot of the tests will show up, it's like 5 days before your missed period or something like that. So I'm like, just because I like to be sure in my mind to like know what's going on with my body. And when things are starting to be a little different, I don't like that. I don't like to not know what's going on with my body. And I had even checked my cervix to see if it felt any different. And it kind of felt like similar to what it would around my period, like really soft and like really warm. Now that I look back on it, it's probably a little extra like soft and like mushy warm kind of. I know that might be a little TMI, but you're most likely a woman if you're watching this. So I'm just kind of giving all the like details of things that I actually remember and that I wrote down. At this point though, even though I was kind of having some symptoms, I was still in denial. So I was like, let me just take a test just in case my boyfriend asked me like, have you started your period yet? Or are you pregnant? The reason I was testing for ovulation during these postpartum after Kyrie for these 2 years was because I was not trying to get pregnant, surprisingly. Typically, I could do the charting and take my temperature, but because with breastfeeding and then with my son waking up at different hours, taking my temperature just wasn't like realistic at the time. I know they have those like those rings now that like help you with that, but like I don't have one of those. But it actually probably is a good idea to sync your cycles with your charts and stuff. And so you can kind of know your temperature. You can probably pin it down to the exact day that you're like ovulating just based off of your temperature and stuff. Things do get a little tricky though, I will say, when you're breastfeeding. That is when it gets a little bit harder because your hormones are still a little bit different when you are producing breast milk. The ovulation test kits, whether you're trying to prevent pregnancy or get pregnant, also have pregnancy tests. So you know, I've taken a few before just to kind of like same thing, clear my mind, like, okay, yeah, I know I'm not like gonna expect a surprise baby. So I end up peeing in a cup and I put the little test strip in there and I set it down and I'm thinking automatically like it's gonna be a negative, like it'll be cool. And so I'm looking at it, mind you, it's 10 o'clock at night. Kyrie happened to be up late that night. I don't know why. Normally he goes to bed at like 7:30. 8 o'clock, but he happened to be up with me. So I'm like literally like trying to get me and him prepared to get in the shower. I'm like multitasking, doing a ton of things at once. And I go back to look at it and I'm like, wait, hold on. I already see the line. Like it's not like a super, super faint line. Like it just started getting darker and darker and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was looking at Kyrie and he doesn't know what he's just running back and forth upstairs, like from room to room, like to me. And I'm just like in shock. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like it was literally so shocking for me because I just was in my head, like in denial. So I had no idea that I was pregnant in that moment. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I kind of just like sat there in shock for a good like 10 minutes while I watched it go darker. And I'm like, I'm just thinking of all of the things like, you know, as moms, like when you're not expecting a baby at the moment, you just start thinking of all the things of like, you know, you get your nerves, you're shocked. You're like, oh my gosh, like you just kind of think like, am I prepared for this? Like, are we prepared for this? You know, like, oh my goodness. You just have all of these like crazy fleeting emotions like going off at once. And you're just like, whoa. So I called my best friend and I told her and she was like, what? She was like not expecting it at all. And we were both just like looking at each other like because I FaceTimed her and she was just like, oh my gosh. So anyways, and then I end up telling my boyfriend, but he thought I was playing with him. He was just like, you're lying, like stop playing. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. And he was just like, you're not fucking with me? I'm like, no. Mind you, my boyfriend already has 2 older kids. My son was his 3rd, and this one will be his 4th. So he's got a little bunch going on here. Of course, men as like the provider is always thinking of like, oh my gosh, like one more kid, you know? So that's how I found out I was pregnant. Those were the symptoms that kind of led up to me actually taking the test. So funny because I was thinking like when I took the test, I was like, oh, it's probably gonna come up negative, but I'll take another one in a few days just to be sure because it could be a little too early. But nah, y'all, that line was lining. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I was almost kind of nervous that it was gonna be twins with how like dark it kind of came up. But yeah, so week 4, after I had found that out, a few days after that, I didn't feel like anything. I didn't have any nausea. I will say that there were some days when I would go on walks with my son and I would kind of like the sense, the smells of everything were very heightened for me, but that kind of is like a natural thing for me sometimes. So I didn't think nothing of that. So those were like the main things though that like kind of led up to like ding ding ding, like you could be pregnant. But it's just crazy to me because the symptoms of like my first pregnancy to this one in that time frame were so different. With my first pregnancy, I like set some goals for myself to like run like 6 miles a day, and I noticed like my ligaments felt like overstretched in my ankles and in my hips, which had never been a thing like at all. And I just thought like, oh, must have overdid it. Come to find out I was pregnant. So like that was something in that one. And then like I said, my breasts super swelled during that time, like pretty fast. I do remember having some cramping, you know, that felt like period cramping. But it just, you know, with my first pregnancy, I didn't have any nausea or morning sickness. So with this pregnancy too, I was just like, okay, I'm probably just not going to deal with that. But that's where this pregnancy was a little bit different, or has been a little bit different, I should say. So stay tuned for weeks 5 to 8. Next time I'll be talking to you guys about that. And so here is a little video of me during that week. And mind you, it's so crazy because when you find out you're pregnant, your baby is literally like freaking sand or something like that, like at that small, but you get so bloated. Like literally after I found out during that first week, I was super bloated. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I already look like frumpy, like, you know, obviously in my own way. I looked bigger then than I did like weeks later, which is such a trip. Yeah, so stay tuned for the next video. I hope you guys enjoy. Let me know though in the comments, you guys, if your guys' milk supply dropped as soon as you found out you're pregnant, because I was trying to look for that on the internet. I found one mom that said that that's how she knew she was pregnant. She was like an OBGYN, and I was like, wow, okay, finally found somebody that like this happened to. Everybody else, like it was like different symptoms. So anyways, I just know that I loved watching videos while I was pregnant, my first pregnancy and also this pregnancy, of just like symptoms and things that we felt during weeks to weeks. So that's why I kind of wanted to do that. I thought it'd be really cool. And also sometimes as you get older or after you have your kids, like you kind of forget. And so I'm glad I took notes so I can share with you guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.